Hi, welcome to my latest YouTube video and podcast. I'm Rosenberg. I'm the author of the brand new, recently published, The Codependency Revolution, Fixing What Has Always Been Broken. Today I'm going to speak about a part of the book that is in the chapter, I think it's chapter 7, The New Codependency. In that chapter, I lay out what everyone should know, understand, what is codependency, what is a codependent, and where do we go from now? I not only reworked it, revitalized it, but gave it theoretical and practical integrity. My plan for writing this book is to overhaul the antiquated, much maligned, and pretty much useless work, useless theory, concepts, descriptions, everything that we know about codependency. Just doesn't work, and it's always been broken. But today I'm going to talk about a specific section of the book that is in the chapter Codependency Personality Types. But before I talk about that, let me give you a backstory. Usually when I write my books, it comes after years of reflection, my own focus, attempts to try to overcome, solve the problems in my own life. I wrote The Human Magnet Syndrome, the first edition, in 2013. It's no coincidence that before and during writing that book, I was struggling with codependency. So what I'm trying to say is, like The Alchemist, I don't know if some of you read Paul Coelho's book or understand exactly what an alchemist was or was understood to be. They tried to take lead and turn it into gold. Because science had not yet advanced, they thought it could happen. Well, analogously, well-meaning people try to take an addictions model, addictions concept, and turn it into codependency. It never worked, and it caused more harm than good. So in my book, I spent 350 pages. By the way, it's 300 pages. I had the interior designer squeeze it into 300. But I spent all that time giving you a full and complete understanding, presentation of codependency. But in one section that I'm talking about in the chapter of codependency personality traits, I talk about one trait in specific called threshold reactor. As I was saying in my backstory, it comes from my own understanding of me, my life, and what is responsible for my codependency, or what I call self-love deficit disorder. And a lot of times I figure myself out just by thinking, pondering, reflecting. Sometimes it's in my own psychotherapy. Other times it is when I am giving or providing psychotherapy. And there was a client of mine who had this relationship pattern where they would take only so much narcissistic abuse and have this point of time, this threshold when they would say enough, and they would get mad, they would set boundaries, and they would seek to end the relationship. And that made a lot of sense to me. So what I did was I included it in my chapter of I think I have 10, maybe 12 codependency personality traits or profiles. And I thought, well, this is a good one. It makes a lot of sense. And then I would realize, oh my gosh, that's me. That's how I am. So I'm going to talk to you about threshold reactors. First, let's start off with the basic definition of codependency. In order to understand the variety or the variations of codependency personality types, it's important to understand that there is one single, simple, specific definition. Although I don't plan for codependency to be added to the Diagnostic Statistics Manual, the DSM, or the ICD-13, I believe is the latest one, I kind of fantasize about it. But that aside, as a clinician who understands that the name of a mental health disorder has to be specific and fit the problem, and to diagnose it, you have to have a short, concise set of symptoms to match with the disorder. For example, ADHD, forgetfulness, get distracted easily, lose things, goes on and on, depression, negativity, hopelessness, increased sleep or decreased sleep, increased eating or decreased eating, etc. I wanted to do the same thing with codependency. So it starts off with a basic, very basic definition. So the basic definition of codependency is a person who gives all the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection, LRCTP. By the way, if you've read my second edition of the Human Magnet Syndrome, you probably are noticing that I've expanded that definition. It used to be just love, respect, and caring. So a person who gives all the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection with hopes, with anticipation that it will be reciprocated. But because of the Human Magnet Syndrome and the fact that they are in a romantic relationship with a person with a personality disorder who's a pathological narcissist, it is not reciprocated. And yet they stay in a relationship. Now here's the concise version. Codependency is a personal relationship problem for which a person gives all the love, respect, caring, trust, and protection, want it to be reciprocated, tries to get it reciprocated, but it is not, or they are compelled, or they are gaslit into staying in a relationship. Simple. That is the definition. That's it. It doesn't have to be complicated. Now there's an understanding that I began probably around 7 years ago when I decided that codependency had to be simply defined, just like any mental health disorder. It had to have discernible symptoms that have to match up with the disorder in order for someone to be considered a codependent. And it has to be independent of personality traits. For example, you can have major depression and have anger problems. You can have anger, depression, and be obsessive. You can have ADHD and be sad and lie. You can have OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and drink. My point is, mental health disorders are not defined by personality traits. They are independent. Unfortunately, the field of codependency got into big trouble and entered very murky territory when it started to mix personality traits with the disorder. CODA got it completely wrong. And by the way, I have a significant part of the book that addresses CODA and how it got so many things wrong and why it needs to be fixed. And by the way, I really respect 12-step programs and CODA, so it's my attempt to make it a better organization, not to just tear it down. So, personality traits are independent. The very first personality traits that I began with, and if you followed me, you know this, it's the active versus the passive codependent. The active is the one that is always trying to control, stop, plead, argue, manipulate the narcissist into giving him or her what she wants or desires. And of course, because it's a person, because the narcissist has a personality disorder, that's like wrestling with a pig and hoping you don't get dirty and knowing the pig likes to wrestle. By the way, I just stole George Bernard Shaw's saying. Passive codependence. Now, you guys are probably much younger than I am. But when I was a little kid, there was a TV show on called All in the Family, and there was a character called Edith Bunker. And she was as codependent as could be. But she was quiet. She sacrificed. She tried to keep the peace. She tried to get people to understand what to do by taking the passive, nice way. Well, that's where I came up with passive codependent. And then after active and passive, I came up with anorexic codependent. And from there, I came up with cerebral and oblivious codependence. And then when I wrote this book, I came up with 8 more. But the goal is not to talk about all of those personality traits. That could be for another video. This one is specifically for threshold reactors. Threshold reactors have a penchant or an ability to disassociate affectively or emotionally when their problems or their struggles or difficulties or pain within the problem exceeds their capacity to deal with it. And because it's a codependent, the way that they deal with it is they push it down. They try to ignore it. They try to fix it. They try to solve it. They try to compartmentalize it. There are various ways that different type of codependents try to manage or control the problem or deny its existence. Well, the person who is a threshold reactor is no different from the other codependents in which they give all the LRCTP, want it, reciprocated, it's not, and they stay in a relationship. But what makes them different is they get to a threshold point where they can't manage it anymore. Their defense mechanisms break down. Their penchant or ability to disassociate affectively or emotionally, and which allows them to stay in a relationship for fear of being alone, lonely, consumed by shame. And of course, if you followed me, you know those are the constituent parts of codependency. They push it all down and try not to think or even consider all the bad things going around within them and around them. But they get to a point where it's just too much defenses. And it's the proverbial, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Something happens and they cannot manage it through their dysfunctional coping style mechanisms. And they kind of have an explosion. Or as I would say, they have an implosion. They explode inside, and then an explosion where all of a sudden there is chaos in their thinking, in their communication, in setting boundaries. They get upset, they get impatient, and all at one time they start to express what they work so hard to not think about, deny, or just keep it tamped down or pushed down. And like a volcano, the threshold reactor starts to confront the narcissist without fear of retaliation, without fear of consequences. They just don't care anymore. They are done. They reached a threshold and they are reacting. And it is in anger, or it can be in controlled, dissociated like rage. One is external, screaming, yelling, and one is inside, where you are really, really mad, but your voice is not loud. You're not physically aggressive, but you are just seething with rage and anger. And all they know is they have to get out. It's the antithesis of what I understand codependency to be. Codependency is, generally speaking, and of course you know generally speaking is the wrong way to explain codependency, but bear with me. You figure out a way to manage all of the push down anger, resentment, shame, loneliness, but then the dam, the mechanics of what holds it down breaks open, and it is the outward explosion. And depending on your personality type, it can be outward rage or calm, focused rage. It all depends. Remember, how people are in their personalities or communication styles, it's independent of codependency and, for that matter, pathological narcissism. The threshold reactor, in one fell swoop, breaks free from the denial, which is an acronym that I love using. Don't even know I am lying. And by the way, I understand that no is spelled with a K. But it is a moment where the dam of denial, where you are unconsciously keeping understanding of your codependency, your narcissistic abuse, your gaslighting, your powerlessness to consequences, and it floods up. That is why I say threshold reactors have this mild form of dissociation. They push it down. Incidentally, all SLDs have a mild form of dissociation. That is the way that they manage all of the pain and agony and suffering and rationalize to themselves why they need to stay or should stay or have no choice but to stay in a relationship. But back to threshold reactors. The explosion inside, the explosion, the expression of anger, resentment, and the necessity to escape. The threshold reactor starts to feel intense fight or flight. Intense. For those who are not familiar with that term, it's a term that describes most animals' reactions to imminent death, danger. Their body, their autonomic, sympathetic, parasympathetic, biological systems go on high alert, and they are focused, and it's like they're preparing to survive what could be death. And everything is peaking, hormones, muscle reactions, everything is peaking in order to survive something that could be catastrophic. And so with the threshold reactor, they have a fight or flight reaction to what now is the complete open understanding of their severely dysfunctional relationship that up until this time they were oblivious. They panic. They freak out. They understand that they have to escape. Well, the problem is, up to this point, a lot of threshold reactors have not really articulated their anger or frustration. So it surprises everyone, including, of course, the narcissist. What the narcissist could not have prepared for is the resolution, the resolve of the codependent to escape. They leave, they call the cops, they hire an attorney. Whatever the codependent does, it is to survive, to protect itself, and with that fight or flight set of impulses, it's to escape. And they have just like a horse, they have blinders on, and they can only look forward. In other words, they can only look at the exit door, because if they look around them, they might be distracted or unconsciously know that they could be talked back into staying in the relationship or fall victim to their own internal codependency-related pathological loneliness, core shame, and fear of abandonment. So threshold reactors, such as myself, get to a point where you say, WTF, I can't take this anymore. Not only is the narcissist surprised, but everyone around you is surprised. I can't tell you how many people were completely blown away when I decided to end a relationship. Because up until that point, I was, and for those who are listening and not watching, I'm doing air quotes, where I was a good codependent by managing everything, smiling when I was angry, agreeing when I disagreed, making excuses, overcompensating, and never really talking about my sadness, misery, and repressed and suppressed anger. And so people around the codependent, whether it's close friends, family, superficial friends, they are blown away. Like, what the heck is happening, Ross? I had no idea that things were that bad in this relationship. And that's a version of what comments that I received a lot when I would have my threshold reaction, because I had a pattern of these, which is why I noticed it and I was able to help identify it and now share it with you guys. And of course, that triggered my core shame, and because it felt like I was lying, but I wasn't. Denial, remember the acronym, don't even know you were lying. Denial is not what you do, at least denial in this case. It's not what you do, it's what happens to you. So threshold reactors only see the exit, and it's a very narrow path, corridor to it. They have their fight or flight energy to escape, and sometimes that's superhuman strength, emotional strength, ability to fight for their life. But up until that time, they were passive and compliant and oblivious. But here is the problem with being a threshold reactor. Up until that point, you are suffering. You might know you're suffering, but you manage it so well, you don't understand, realize its cumulative effect. But that's not even the biggest problem, because threshold reactors are codependents. They have a lifelong relationship pattern, attraction pattern to narcissists that can't be stopped. It can't be stopped because if you've been following me, you know it comes from attachment trauma that is stored in our limbic system, specifically the amygdala. And until we resolve the trauma of what happened to us and the harm caused to us when we were children and growing up by our narcissistic parent, then we are perpetually trapped within this codependency, or what I call self-love deficit disorder. So the problem with the threshold reactor is you get out of the relationship, you get yourself safe, you deal with the consequences, and everything calms down. You make promises. For those who follow me, I always say that, but there's so many different elements to my theories and concepts of codependency. I just want to remind you that codependency is also an addiction. Just like any other addiction, you go to rehab and you promise you never will use it again, and something happens and boom, you're back on it. Well, codependency as an addiction, you promise yourself this will never happen again, I'll never make this mistake. You go on YouTube and you watch the thousands, hundreds of videos on narcissism, some good, some not. And you believe that will be the last narcissist you ever fall in love with. But that's not how it works, because you have a broken picker. Or as my therapy said, you'll fall in love with the same person, but who has a different face. And the next person will be a pathological narcissist, and they will have a personality disorder. And that will either be narcissistic, borderline, or antisocial personality disorder, or sociopath. So threshold reactions get you out, help you escape, gives you this feeling of false power. It's a concept I developed years ago that explains a surge of anger-fueled resolve to fight back and escape, or to try to fight back and escape. The problem is false power syndrome makes you want to fight, and that fight in most relationships with pathological narcissists make things even worse. But for the threshold reactors, it gets them out of the relationship. And once they calm down, they come back to themselves, their self-love deficient selves. And when they start to date, their broken picker is going to point them in the direction to what seems naturally attractive, the chemistry that will just blow up and be beyond pleasurable, beyond wonderful, beautiful. And they're going to wake up and find out that their soulmate has devolved into their cellmate. So if you'd like to learn more about codependency personality types, specifically the threshold reactor, which is one of 12, don't quote me, consider buying my book, The Codependency Revolution, Fixing What Has Always Been Broken, or just go to my website at selfloverecovery.com and check out what I do and how I try to help people and the resources available. Thank you for your time and interest. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel or follow my podcast, just take a second and do that. I try to put out new material every week. Take care, and thank you, and be well.